It's wonderful to have everyone here. You know, it's been said that Texas is in perpetual drought, punctuated by times of flood. Weather conditions across our state are ever changing, and each area faces its own unique challenges. Coastal communities are threatened by hurricanes, and parts of our state that are normally dry can experience intense flash flooding. In the aftermath of an event, communities find themselves repairing and rebuilding, but also asking the question, what can be done to prevent this from ever happening again? And I think if we've talked about the state flood planning process and the vision of the 2019 legislative session to pass Senate Bill 8, directing the creation of the first ever state flood plan, we all recognize that we can't approach things as we have in the past. We're in area floods, we go back in, we ask about mitigation, but we need to be forward thinking. And we need to be thinking about things, as Governor Abbott said, to future-proof our state. We may not know what's coming, but we need to be thinking about what we can do, whether it is a hurricane, whether it is flood, whether it is drought, and prepared to be able to respond. We know that it starts with mapping and planning, and we're honored to have key leadership who are boots on the ground today in this planning effort and are responsible for charting the first ever regional flood planning effort. And so a very quick introduction of our panelists. Brandon Wade, General Manager of Gulf Coast Water Authority, our Region 8 Chair, the Lower Brazos Flood Planning Group. Brandon is also an engineer. He brings more than 35 years of municipal experience to his role at Gulf Coast. Allison Strube, Director of Water Utilities for the City of San Angelo, our Region 9 Chair for the Upper Colorado Flood Planning Group. Allison is a professional engineer. She's been working for the City of San Angelo for almost a decade. Allison serves as the large municipalities representative on the Region F Regional Flood Planning Group as well. Floyd Hartman, Assistant City Manager for the City of Amarillo, our Region 1 Chair for the Canadian Upper Red Flood Planning Group. Floyd has over 26 years of experience in municipal government. In addition to serving as Chair of Region 1, Floyd also serves as the municipal representative on the Region A Water Planning Group. And Commissioner David Garza, Commissioner of Cameron County Precinct 3, Region 15 Chair of the Lower Rio Grande Flood Planning Group. In real life, David is a pharmacist. He has served as Commissioner of Cameron County for more than 20 years. So happy to have each and every one of you here and appreciate taking the time to kind of talk about regional flood planning. So I thought what we'd do is we kind of kick things off. We'd have a question for each one of our panelists, and then we talk about some questions and get thoughts and ideas as we kind of move forward. And also, at the end, have an opportunity, as we learned during lunch, to have some questions. So to kind of kick things off, this question is for Brandon. The response from Texans interested in stepping up to lead this regional flood planning effort was tremendous. The Water Development Board received over 600 nominations of potential members to fill approximately 180 slots. The initial members were selected for their commitment to public service, their understanding of flood risk and issues, affiliation with the interest category for which they were nominated, and their willingness to work cooperatively in a leadership role to protect communities from the effects of flood. Since 2018, you've worked at Gulf Coast to create what you described to me as a planning tradition. Expect it's going to happen and rely on it, to quote you. What drew you to this flood planning effort, and why did you want to become personally engaged?
Well, I'll tell you, Director Jackson, I became obsessed with this really from the very beginning. As a matter of fact, I think I cornered Jeff at a general manager meeting one day and wore him out about it. And I think I did some public comment at one of the Water Development Board meetings and jumped the gun before you even had applications telling you I wanted to be a member of two different ones of the regions. And so I was very, very excited when I was accepted to be a part of Region 8. And one of the reasons that I was very focused on it is that I have really been in the water supply business for some time, and I wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity to do really serious planning when it came to balancing the need of flooding and water supply. And so one of the things that I thought that I would be able to bring to the group had to do with planning and the routes that are associated with it. So just to tell you a little story about the Gulf Coast Water Authority, in 2018 when I first went to work there, GCWA actually was founded in 1965. And we did a plan for everything that we wanted to do at GCWA in 1965, and then promptly did none of it. And then we spent several decades not doing any more planning at all. And so when I first got there in 2018, the chair of that board, one of the things he asked me to do is he wanted me to get us into a planning mode. Well, I come from municipalities primarily, and when I first started introducing that to our board went, oh, no, municipal planning, no, we don't want to do any of that kind of stuff. Well, when it comes to, I told them, no, we're not doing zoning or anything like that. We're trying to do strategic planning for the organization. Well, the first year when we went through ramping up the process, we had some reluctance. And then at the end of that first year, we had a document to work with that was part of our plan. And then we started that year after year of that cycle of planning, and it got more and more of them on board. And we're now about to start year 4 of that planning cycle. And now all of them are on board, and they really, really are focused on it. So one of the things that I think is extraordinarily important is to create quite literally a planning tradition. And so the water supply regions have been going on for decades now, and so they have that tradition in place and they have that expectation in place. I think at this point, it's incumbent upon us to create that planning tradition or planning tradition that will provide the foundation for us all to move forward.
Well, and of course, we don't plan to plan, we plan to build. And the natural consequences, if we got a plan, if a community has a strategic plan, if a region has a strategic plan, then as resources become available, working again cooperatively, we're able to move forward and mitigate some of the issues, whether it is, as you mentioned, whether it is what you're doing for your water authority or what you're doing for water supply planning or what we're doing for flood planning. So, excellent observation.
Thank you.
Our next question is for Allison. The 15 regional flood planning groups are responsible for developing Texas's first regional flood plans, which will be due to the Water Development Board by January 2023, which will then roll up into the first ever state flood plan due to the legislature in September of 2024. The first of these regional flood planning group meetings occurred in late October, beginning in November of 2020. So now we're almost a year in. And after all the 15 regional flood planning groups convened their initial meetings, adopted their bylaws, selected their chairs, and chose political subdivision sponsors, they've continued meeting and working at an aggressive speed. What have you experienced over the last year that you foresee will contribute to a real success in this first round of planning?
Well, so I was just telling Commissioner Garza that he asked how it was going, and I said, well, it's pretty much like drinking from a fire hydrant right now. This is my first time to chair a regional group. I do sit on the regional water planning. However, I have not chaired or led this type of effort. But to me, the heartbeat or of what I've experienced over at least the past 6 months and year, and as we move forward with the processes, the heartbeat to me is the technical consultants and the sub-consultants. They are really helping get all the regional flood planning group interest categories, ideas, the public comments, and all of those, and really trying to help guide that, because what we develop or what we set our goals to be and those type of things is going to be the meat of the technical memos and the documents that they are producing. So to me, it's those consultants and sub-consultants that, at least in my mind, have really are going to help shape this state flood plan.
Well, we're very fortunate, I think, to have the consultants that have stepped forward to work with all of the regional flood planning groups. And I think, sometimes they don't get recognized. So I'm really, really glad that you made that as a part of what you see as important in terms of our success moving forward. And again, we execute to a process, and so we're putting the process in place. And so important that we have that leadership from the community the resources from the consultants that are working
Yes.
through the process so that we get, a really good work product at the end. So excellent observation. So this question is for Floyd. In the panhandle of the West Texas area, where we know water resources are so precious, what do you see as the opportunity for flood control to work in tandem with water supply? And of course, this was a big thing that we saw in the 5th. This is a big thing we heard from the legislature across Texas. And might this fit into the agricultural world and match up with what we know you personally have been such an advocate for, which is water conservation?
Yes, Director Jackson. First, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. And I'm just honored to be on this panel and have this opportunity. I'm blessed with a tremendously wonderful board, other board members in Region 1, representatives of which are agriculture. And the reason one reason agriculture is so important in Region 1 is we're over 34,000 square miles and 2 cities. Amarillo, Wichita Falls are the main cities, but we are heavily in agriculture. And conservation is a component of the flood plan in coordination with water planning. So my experience on Region A provides me that opportunity to understand that I can combine those concepts from the water plan to the flood plan. So things like playa lakes, which out in West Texas, in our region, are very, very critical water features that I know the engineering community knows very well is different than flowing channels. But those provide us the opportunity in this flood planning. They're flood collectors. So we know that we can incorporate those into whatever this plan and these goals and objectives are. So water conservation comes into play that they become a water source in some locations, in some avenues. That doesn't mean we can't create the same thing in a flowing channel, but that's what these goals and objectives in this technical memorandum will help us understand. We're also blessed with a wonderful consultant that's helping us through this. I also want to point out that our communities, it's the challenge that we have with this concept is reaching out to that community, and that's a challenge that we have. We extend from New Mexico almost to I-35, and I know other regions have the same challenges within developing this plan. And so I asked myself, what does it feel like? It feels just like I remember the homework was due tomorrow and I forgot it. But it was assigned to us, and we accepted that. And we're up to that challenge. This board and the Texas Water Development Board has helped us and supported us, and the staff has been wonderful. But that's where we're at in the goal setting stage. We've moved forward quickly, but I think in introducing agriculture to this and reaching out to those communities is going to be essential for our success, and we're brainstorming on that. It's a topic of our next meeting. It's been a topic of our past meetings, and we continue to look at that. But those are the challenges that I see related to water conservation. There's a tremendous avenue. The cities that I talked about, Amarillo and Wichita Falls, both have lakes that we rely on with water quality issues. And I think it can combine, flood control can combine into water quality control as well. And that gives us another avenue for water sources. So multiple water sources can be identified through this plan and coordinated with other plans.
So flood control combined with water quality, and for conservation, conservation is a water supply. Very key points and excellent. So a question for the Commissioner. This is an unprecedented effort that combines and integrates mapping, planning, and mitigation for the first time ever in Texas. An integrated flood program that's never been done like this at any scale anywhere in the world. It's an extraordinary milestone and an extraordinary program. At the very onset of this flood planning effort, you established a vision for your planning region. What are you doing to ensure that this vision becomes the focus and to ensure more skin in the game, the better the end game?
Exactly. Initially, it started when I became a commissioner and I delved into water quality issues. I represent the Lower Laguna Madre, which has zero population, no one to speak out for it, no one to protect it except for those that are interested in the environment, but a very, very critical piece for us down there for our economy. South Padre Island and the coast are adjacent to each other, and this body of water is one of six hypersaline lagoons in the world that is very much affected by stormwater runoff, very much affected by hurricanes, very much affected by all these things. We got involved, started coming to Austin a lot, met now Speaker Phelan, who invited us to testify in his committee in 2019, and we did. And when we did that, there was a group of us that saw the vision that he portrayed for what he wanted to put together for the state of Texas and how he presented it. We were fortunate that we were allowed to testify on some issues that we had with flooding that had occurred successive years in a row down there. As a result of that, we felt that we were very much empowered to develop not only a vision, but develop the plan. And the plan needed to be inclusive. The challenge has been the geographic area, as Floyd mentioned. It's challenging to be inclusive when you're 300 miles away from someone. It's challenged to be inclusive when you meet people on Zoom. You know, it's very challenging. It's been a real pleasure to sit here and visit with the folks that I've had an opportunity to visit with, where you see them eye to eye. And that's the challenge that we're gonna make sure that we overcome in the very near future with our region. We feel that the southern part of our region is very well connected because we're close to each other. We have a lot of planning efforts in many other areas that are regional in nature. When we first talked to you guys at the water, it says, don't come up with your backyard problem, bring us a regional solution. And that has been the vision that we have all now accepted and wants to fulfill. We know we're a small part of the big quilt in the state of Texas, but you know, the vision that the speaker had in putting this together and passed by our legislature and signed by our governor, I think is going to lead us in a very, very good direction in preparing, moving into the future, not only to make sure that the water we get, we can use and save to use later, and at the same time take care of our flooding issues that are ever so prevalent in many areas of the state. And for us, you know, with the double threat of stormwater runoff and also hurricanes, it's even a little more challenging. But it can all be merged together with everyone's help.
Well, interesting to hear about, you know, your focus not only on water supply, on flooding, but also on care for the environment. And
exactly.
So, unique challenges kind of moving forward, but very fortunate that, again, you've identified that, you know, we have to have a vision and then we have to focus on making the vision a reality.
Exactly. And we can have responsible economic development. You know, people that develop in your area can be cognizant of the environment that they're developing in and making sure that they not only be careful with how they develop, but at the same time, if there's mitigation associated with what they're doing, be able to maximize that mitigation in those areas that are the most vulnerable for our counties.
So you see the flood planning effort as being able to kind of...
It's a roadmap.
A roadmap for that. Well, there you go. So question for all. Knowing that mapping and modeling are the key elements for identifying and mitigating flood risk, we've heard that data collection is already one of your biggest challenges, especially in rural areas where data might not even exist. I'm going to say it, the better the data, the better the science, the better the science, the better the policy. Can each of you expand on your data collection effort, how you're conducting outreach to the communities to gather data, and how you're figuring out what data we have and then determining what data that is needed.
It's an enormous task, to be very honest with you, and Lower Brazos ranges from not quite, but almost Abilene to Freeport. And so you've got circumstances where you've got coastal flooding that is quite different than the flash flooding of central Texas, that's quite different from just upstream of Possum Kingdom where it doesn't rain much at all. And trying to put all of that together, ranging from extremely dense urban development to rural development. And so our folks have been reaching out, and some folks have been able to give us great data right at first, but others we're having to work with real closely. And our consultants have been calling directly and working with the individuals to make sure that we get as much data as we possibly can. And one thing I'd also like to point out is our support from the Water Development Board has been amazing. It truly has. And Reich's our guy. At Lower Brazos, and I'll tell you, if you haven't been relying upon your people at the Water Development Board, rely on your people at the Water Development Board, because they really know what they're doing, and we appreciate Reich and Reem as well on everything that they've been working on with us.
Well, thank you. That was very kind, and we are very fortunate to have such wonderful talent. So, Allison, what have you seen kind of in your area in terms of data gathering? I mean, is it the same challenge that he described? Or?
A lot of the same challenges. So we have some areas that are unmapped, and so trying to reach out to those areas, those counties, those communities. And we have a lot of areas that are, very sparsely populated, farming communities. And so in our group, we've been struggling or working through, as Floyd said, how do we get the data from those communities? How do we get those people involved? And so we are trying, a two-prong approach, whether it's the virtual, sending out the surveys, reaching out to schools, county commissioners, and everything in those parts of our region that we don't have good data on. And then also we've put boots on the ground. Our consultants have started that drive across West Texas and just setting up in-person meetings with those that are willing to do so, see what they have, and so that we can kind of see where we are at, gauge that, and see in the future kind of where that leads us.
So Floyd, have you seen anything from a data standpoint that you can kind of share that has been particularly in West Texas where, I mean, maybe the first question you get is, why are we thinking about flood? We don't even get any rain out here.
Yes, a very common response is, especially in the rural communities in our region, is we want the rain. Flood's not a problem. We prefer the rain. But yes, data is a huge challenge in our region, especially as rural as our region is. We have a wonderful consultant who actually took extra effort to go meet people even during COVID, and I'm impressed with that effort from the consultant. But we also have some board members who are licensed engineers who understand this challenge. And we recognize, and I also agree, it's ongoing. We're not going to complete everything we want in this cycle, but we know that we can do the best we can in this cycle and prepare it for the next cycles and improve every step of the way.
Absolutely.
And provide an avenue for our communities to best serve their residents in response to projects. So we'll prioritize those things and get the best that we can through this process, and knowing that we're setting everyone up for the best they can be in the future.
An excellent observation, I think, is that it's an evolving process, and to the extent that we can have a good firm foundation at the onset, we can kind of build on it as we move forward. So, so we gather the data, evaluate the risk, and propose mitigation, basically creating the regional flood plans and then ultimately a state flood plan. So from your perspective, how is this approach different than the way we've done mitigation in the past? And do you think that this approach will give Texas a leg up to accommodate future growth?
Most definitely. I think that, being proactive instead of reactive, educating, using technology, having some compassion with the folks that we deal with, and being empathetic of the needs of those that are affected very directly gives us the model to where we can go out, especially to some of the areas that are most difficult to reach, and give them a reason to become interested in the plan and what we're doing and how impactful it can be for them as we move into the future, whether it be future development, whether it be future conservation efforts, whatever it might be, the plan that is being developed will help us better navigate the resources that we will have. So I believe that the plan is a step in a very right direction for us. And I think that as far as mitigation is concerned, moving into the future, it'll be much easier to accomplish knowing what we can expect.
So knowing kind of what happened in the past, but also looking forward to the future, very similar to the way that we do water planning, and not just mitigating the past flood event, but looking at what the future might hold. It's been said, and of course it was definitely something that the legislature in my mind was very clear about, in that it needed to be regional, and that it needed to be very much a cooperative effort. Everyone kind of engaged in the process, something very much basin-wide. So from your experience and kind of working through the very early stages of the flood planning, how is that going? Are people working together cooperatively? What has been, I guess, the best way to kind of bring people on board? What is the incentive? What is the carrot? Or do you use the carrot, or use the stick, or do you use a little bit of both?
I think that just working together and talking to each other is very, very important. So to give you an example, Lower Brazos, and next to us is Region 6, San Jacinto, which is the Houston area. To be quite frank with you, it depends on how hard it rains, whether that's two regions or just one. And so I think it's very important for us all to be talking to each other and making sure that we know what each other is doing. At this particular point, we have liaisons between the various different groups. Those liaisons, I think, have been working very, very well together. We have liaisons not only to each other's flood groups, but also to the water supply groups as well. And I think just making sure that that discussion takes place is extraordinarily important.
Floyd, have you had any experience in that?
Oh, yes. It's been wonderful. The group is amazing again. But external stakeholders, Army Corps of Engineers has been engaged. We had a wonderful presentation from them at one of our meetings. Beyond just this type of interaction with internally, but broad interaction in the community, you just see the glimpses of the success. And we have a lot to work to do, but bringing that to the communities and interacting with all of those groups, the railroad, TxDOT, other agencies have been involved. It's been amazing to see how, I think that the timing has allowed us to better interact in that aspect, that when they realize that we're under a time frame that's accelerated, it gets past all of those challenges quicker, and that interaction has been more positive. So I've been impressed with that, especially other state agencies, railroad, Army Corps of Engineers, and the things that we've been able to bring into the group.
So you mentioned engaging the public and promoting and sharing your activities. So how have the planning groups maybe specifically been doing that, thinking outside the box to determine the economic, environmental, and financial impacts? This is, as we said before, it's integrated a large-scale planning effort that's coordinated up and down watersheds and up and down basins. So how important going forward will the collaboration amongst all of these players be, and how are you kind of getting there? What are some specifics that you can kind of call out and maybe share with the group here in terms of bringing in and engaging some of those stakeholders and promoting this collaboration?
You know, I can give you one specific. In our area, there's a group of cities that continuously have flooding issues. And, you know, we've been able to, as Floyd said, you know, all of a sudden there's interest from other agencies, state and federal, and we've been able to bring in some partners to look at us in some possible solutions, where a particular city was looking at doing some major detention pond systems to mitigate some of their flooding issues. And as a result of meetings with Army Corps of Engineers, you know, all of a sudden we have an epiphany. We have 3 large resaca systems that have been dried out for years in our county, that have capacity to store all the water that we could ever get. And no one had thought of maybe utilizing those and diverting the water into those resaca. Resaca systems are like streams that hold water, but they're ponds. So, we proposed and put a plan out in cooperation with one of our federal partners to develop a feasibility study to all of a sudden have capacity to, do all this runoff. And again, I go back to my other soapbox. We're going to create areas that are wetlands that have been dried for years. We're going to fill resacas up that will become oceanfront properties for some developers that own the properties around these resacas and have opportunities for economic growth. And also, prevent the flooding that's occurring in this Tri-City area that constantly gets battered after every major rain event. So, that's kind of like an offshoot of all this planning. But I don't believe if we hadn't been doing what we're doing now as a floodplain and infrastructure group, any of this would have come to fruition. So, it's interesting.
That is a real kind of shot in the arm, I think, for flood planning and for the groups and for the collaboration and coming up with an idea that maybe has been there all along, the facilities are there all along, but utilizing them in a different way.
And it's a regional group of cities. It's not like one area in my precinct, okay? I tell people it's not my backyard. This is like, a regional group,
Well, there are just so many opportunities out there when we think of utilizing and flood control to benefit water supply. And particularly, I think that was one of the drivers with the legislature in thinking about, okay, Texas again is in perpetual drought punctuated by times of flood. So is there anything specifically that maybe has come out through the planning effort that kind of is tying water supply to flood that maybe is a little bit different that maybe we haven't heard about or thought about?
It has at least been a topic of conversation for our board members and group members and some of our public, comments is that making sure that the water supply, because San Angelo and the region that we're in is similar to Floyd's, people want the rain. We don't get enough of it, but when we do, it's usually intense. And so just that making sure that that is at the forefront of some of the projects and those ideas as we're shaking out the plan is that water supply be heavily looked at as a part of that.
I think one of the things that's, that everyone needs to keep in mind has to do with when it comes to major flood control and reservoirs and so forth is that the Army Corps of Engineers reservoirs are actually already allocated. And so they're allocated for water supply as a part of it, and part of it is for flooding, and part of it is for electrical power and so forth. And it quite literally takes an act of Congress literally an act of Congress to change those allocations. And for those that don't, and so I'll use the Brazos River Authority as an example, the BRA owns 2 or 3 reservoirs outright, and those reservoirs aren't allocated by Congress, they're allocated by contract. And so the BRA has contracts for water supply to various different entities, and so to change any of that, to move it toward flooding is something that we all need to be cognizant of when we're working toward this, that you can't just change those allocations instantly. It takes quite the effort to move those forward.
And maybe it's not one big answer, it's a lot of little answers very similar to water supply. And so we think traditionally in water supply world of big reservoirs, but then we also know that there's desalination, there's brackish desal, there's conservation. I mean, everything kind of coming together to form it as a system. Do you see something very similar, I mean, as your engineering approach or similar to water supply that maybe is on the forefront for flood control and flood mitigation?
I do think that there's opportunities for all of that to be included, and I think that's why it's so critical that we lead the goals that are included in the plans to include those opportunities, because those communities know what that is, whether that's water supply, if that's agriculture, using a playa lake as a water supply or a municipal water supply from a playa lake. Those things are going to be individual community identified in those projects. And so it's imperative that we have our goals such that they can be included when those projects are identified by the community. So that's what I see as the component of water supply or water quality, and making sure that that goal is in that each regional plan such that each community can identify that project, and they have the institutional knowledge to know what that is. So I think it'll rely on a local community to identify the project to match the goal.
So very much underscoring what we see in water supply is a bottom-up process, right?
Yes.
So you can have the money, you can have the technology, but it's up to that local leadership to come together and to move some of the projects forward, to initiate the planning, and to, again, garner that local leadership and that talent in terms of local communities knowing and understanding their systems and moving forward with the solutions and knowing best. So
Yeah.
as a commissioner, do you see that?
I see that as a really critical piece because, as I mentioned in that project with the resaca beds, they're privately owned. They're not government controlled. They're not, so they're privately owned. So private individuals, at the end of the day, can sell rights for water storage in them to whatever group wants to divert water into them, or can accept the water and store them in them for whatever group wants to divert the water into them. Right now, the water that I'm talking about is all being diverted into the IBWC or the Arroyo Colorado. So we're losing it all. We're not storing it, we're not keeping it, we're not using it. And it goes out as runoff and we lose it. If it's diverted into these resaca beds that we have, they don't produce because it rains and they're muddy, so you can't farm them. You can't use them for grazing animals because it doesn't work. So they're just not usable. So to be able to integrate a program where you can incorporate the ability to help private landowners to store water on their property for potential use down the system by whoever might need it, and at the same time create, again, the habitat and create the environment that they want to be able to develop those areas is very promising. Sometimes you just have to think like totally outside the normal box,
Think out the box and what impacts folks downstream.
And
It impacts people upstream and vice versa. So very much something that we all need to be cognizant of, and something that's very much a part of the regional flood planning process. So for someone sitting in the audience here today who wants to get involved, what should they do? What is something that will help you to meet your objective and to help you kind of carry your message?
I would say get involved. I mean, it's quite simple. We meet at this point monthly and sometimes more frequently than that. Come be a part of our meetings. We would be thrilled to death to have you to be a part of the meetings. Contact us through our website that we have put together. It has enormous resources that are available to it. If anybody wants to be a part of it, don't be shy. Come on. We'd love to hear from you.
I would add that this group's the easy part. We can contact you very easily. Help us reach out to your communities and talk it up in your communities and let them know that exact information. So that's what I would add.
So Allison, how powerful of a messengers are these people here in the audience today?
Oh, I think very powerful. I think sharing, like you said, y'all are the easy part. It's the people out within our communities that this isn't at the forefront of their minds. And so sharing, hey, you should maybe encourage others within our regions to be involved in getting those, not just these people in this room to be active, but encourage friends, family, other organizations, other businesses within individual regions to get involved too.
it's very prevalent that you hear from people when two things happen. They don't have enough water to water their yard, or they got too much water in their yard. Okay, and that's what you started out with. Mm-hmm. It becomes really critical for us to make sure that these guys are great messengers. But reaching out to people has been challenging. We hope that we can initiate an effort, and I visited with Floyd, and he had some ideas, and the ideas that he shared with me were very similar to the ideas that I had discussed driving up here during the drive up, as to how we can reach out to the folks that are not getting the message. Because they're the critical component. It always happens in at least in policy making at county government level, where, you know, when everything is okay, you don't hear from people. When there's a problem, when did you plan that and do that I didn't know about it, you know? And it, you know, we have to kind of like change that paradigm. And if we have to go and march to these small municipalities and cities and counties and enlighten them, you know, I was visiting with our plan sponsor earlier today, and I says, we have to invest in having boots on the ground to going and reaching out to people. It's not the same when you Zoom. I don't care what anybody says. A televisit from the doctor is, you know, I mean, is not the same as seeing the doctor in person. You know, I don't feel he's being held totally responsible for seeing you unless you're looking at him, you know. And that's just my perspective. You know, telepharmacy is not part of what I do either, because it just doesn't work, you know. I mean, it's not the same. If there's nothing else, you got to do it. But, you know, when you have other opportunities, you know, I think that COVID hopefully will be residing to some extent in the numbers, and visiting and being able to see people eye to eye will give us more of an opportunity to engage folks. And that's been very difficult for us in our region, to engage folks.
But I love your challenge, which is invest in boots on the ground and getting the word out. So, and, you know, I think the point that everyone made is that, you know, doing it now is going to pay dividends in the future. So we do have time for some questions. And so if people have questions from the audience, if you would, just kind of raise your hand and we'll have the person with the microphone come to you, and we'll ask our esteemed panelists here to answer a few of your questions.
There's one over here.
Okay.
Y'all mentioned earlier that y'all are in need of data. As someone who, you know, is a bit less technical, what could you give some examples of the type of data that y'all are in need of? Like, yeah.
Excellent question.
I'll defer to the engineers.
Flood planning involves a tremendous amount of survey elevations, slopes, rainfall intensities. It goes into weather service data. It's just, it is wide open in that relationship. In our world, I say ours generously, I'm not an engineer, but the engineering world, the development community collects a lot of understanding of how the water flows with studies related to their subdivisions. That is on a global level related to soil water conservation and related to their areas. We have access to that data, but then a lot of the data is not accurate, not really detailed. So anybody that collects data, a municipality, a county, a surveyor, a developer, engineering firms, they'll understand what that is, but that's a good question. It just goes into that level. And then FEMA related to flooding and their existing data. Again, I'm not an engineer. I've hit the highlights. There's much more to it, but that type of data.
So Floyd, is there a need to ground truth some of this data? So what if I am an individual and I have some personal kind of like information for how flooding occurred in my area? Is that important to kind of bring in and to share with the group?
Yes, and I omitted that piece. Personal experience with a flood, accidents, or even we were looking, oddly we found out that the Weather Service tracks deaths related to flooding. So those unique types of data, fire service data, individuals, we're asking them to get on our websites and give us information related to individual experiences related to flooding over time. That's one thing that the boots on the ground would help us with, those anecdotal flooding events that we can look back and look for data. that type. So thank you, Director.
Yeah, and thank you for that question. That's very insightful. Somebody got it?
There's some back here.
Okay. Suzanne, just stand up and, yeah.
I just wanted to know how each of your planning regions are looking at nature-based solutions.
That is something we have at least discussed as far as the environmental aspect of things, but it's something that we haven't had the time to, I guess, dive in or get far enough into the process to really talk about at this point.
I agree with that. We have people that are on our groups that is their focus. We are just not far enough along and haven't gathered enough data to start that process yet. But it certainly is not just a bunch of engineers sitting around the table. There's all sorts of environmental considerations as well.
And I'll add, in Region 1, we've had initial discussions about including that in the goals.
And
of course-
you heard what I said on, the resaca systems that are dry, so, yeah. And
course,
it's not something new. It's been done in a very small scale already in a part of my precinct, and it works. It's amazing.
Well, and that's what I was going to say, is that it's worked. And oftentimes I think what we're seeing is that in the past we've seen nature-based here and more traditional flood infrastructure mitigation here, when what we're learning is that the real opportunity is the combination of the two, because they provide, different and distinct benefits.
They synergistically help each other at the end of the day.
So excellent question. Thank you, Suzanne. Michael Bloom in the back.
Yeah, thanks so much for the conversation. I know most of us are familiar with the legislation and the rules looking at that whole water supply flood control nexus. And I've been struggling with kind of how do we do that? What does that really look like? And is that practical? So I was just curious if the panel could, think about or talk about some of the ideas that have been coming, that you folks have been coming up with. Because I really think the timing and the quality and the volume are all pretty significant challenges.
I've been struggling with what that's going to look like as well. I mean, to be quite honest with you, this is our first iteration of this. There's the legislation, and then there's the Water Development Board and the staff that has put together an enormous amount of basis and structure for us to work from. And then there's going to be the plans that we all put together. And the first plans are going to be good, and the second plans are going to be better, and the third iteration is going to be excellent. And so I think that we're going to have to build upon what it is that we're doing, do some comparisons to what's going on in water supply planning and so forth, and they are eventually going to grow themselves into amazing plans.
I would add that, in the case of our neighboring county, there's a large reclamation project that is part of the plan in Hidalgo County. And this is for floodwater runoff. And they're in the process of developing this large reclamation project in which they hope that they're able to, at the end of the day, sell back water to municipalities from this reclamation project. That's part of it too. So, you have to look at every opportunity in each one of the different geographic areas and how you can fit in what they have into the plan. And that's the challenge. When folks don't show up and tell you what they have, whether it's a low water crossing flood that they see regularly or whatever else it might be, we don't know to put into the plan. That's why it's critically important that we reach out to the folks.
So there you have it, defining the challenge and the opportunity and the what's needed for mitigation. So defining the as-is so that we can work towards the to-be. So thank you. Thank you for that question. Author of the Eye of the Storm report. Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you first of all for the conversation. It's been excellent. I serve with you as the chair of the Upper Rio Grande Flood Planning Group, so I know a lot of the challenges that you're facing. I also want to thank the Texas Water Development Board. They've been very generous in funding this effort, and they just recently approved an additional influx of money into the flood planning effort. So again, thank you for everything you do. My question is towards sustainability. So we produce the 2023 regional flood plan, and then the Texas Water Development Board produces the 2024 state flood plan. What comes next? How do we sustain this flood planning effort beyond this initial investment by legislature?
I see it similar to the state water plan, that 2024 is the start. And then each successive plan has all those challenges. Each community will have the opportunity to add to that plan and understand what they can benefit from each step of that plan. And in the 5th cycle of the state water plan, communities all over the state are benefiting. And I see that as the exciting part, that communities will start engaging the plan, and that will bring it to the next level, in my opinion, that when you see a need for a project and the local officials see that need, they have an opportunity through this plan to bring it to fruition.
You know, and I'd like to respond to that briefly. I've seen in the 20 years that I've been a county commissioner that if we locally don't have skin in the game, and I thank the Water Development Board for this particular grant that we got and were able to do and be part of. But at the end of the day, it is our community, our responsibility, and we've got to have skin in the game to make things happen. Otherwise, you might as well just fold your hands and give up. You know, if we put our share in, you know, you'll have federal partners and state partners that want to come and be part of what you're doing. That's been what I've seen in my 20 years in county government, regardless of who the governor is, regardless of whoever is. You know, if you're doing something good for your region and your area, the partners will come and they want to be part of it. And one project we did ended up with over 67 partners on a largest wetland mitigation project in the United States. So it can happen. You just have to have the vision, work toward it, have a plan that is fundable, you know, and then figure out how to do that, you know.
A great ending statement. Have a plan, and they will come. Have a plan, and you'll have partners that want to participate. And we so appreciate everybody participating today and our wonderful panel. That's a wrap. Thank you so much. We enjoyed it.